It's great to be here. Thank you, guys. My concern is we are generating an infinite amount of debt. We seem to be sort of, the initial intervention has done whatever it was going to do with all of its imperfections. And I want to know what's going to happen.
Are you talking about government debt, corporate debt, personal debt?
Well, most corporate debt is going down,
right?
Because corporations are hoarding cash. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at the math, I just don't understand what the new model is. Is it a capitalistic model? Is it a different model?
In terms of
by the way, I'd like to be in one of those too big to fail companies. The ones where, they just kind of they bail you out whenever you screw up.
Yeah.
You will be.
But do you think it's because the government is taking on far too much debt coming out of this crisis?
I think it's because it's the difference between politics and business.
Right.
And the logic of politics, every president ultimately has this logic around, well, I'll pass this bill because it roughly has these economics, but then in fact those are not the economics that comes. I mean, the process, the logic of entitlement programs, the logic of the way the government works, and the more I'm involved in business, the more I sit there and think, well, couldn't we run the government a little bit more rationally?
But you were a big supporter of Obama. You were there and still are.
And remain so.
Very much so at the beginning. You're on that council of John Doers and yourself or whatever. And yet, partly because of the way government is, you and everybody else on that council couldn't really go into government. And if I may guess, of the top presidential appointments, the number of people who've actually run a business is approximately 0, right? Is that part of the problem?
Well, first, I'm not sure I agree with the line of questioning because the implication. The Obama administration is full of incredibly smart people. Right? The problem
that may be the problem.
Smart people can be a problem, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that in terms of experience and insight and strategic reasoning, it's among the best we've ever had. And I say that as a strong supporter. The problem is, again, I'm just trying to understand what is the strategy here. Right? It seems as though if you look at the base case, we've now established the following principle. We're going to have deficits beyond the eye can see, large increases in government spending, and this is true in many countries, not just in the United States, and then relatively low growth, and by the way, we have a weak dollar strategy, we just don't call it that. So how do we fix that? Well, my answer is private sector investment, private sector growth, which is always, in my view, how you grow out of these things. Mm-hmm. And I'll defer to the mathematicians and academics who understand this much better than I. Can the current hole we've dug ourselves into be gotten out of with any reasonable growth rate from the sum of all of the economics? And that's an interesting economic debate. But the problem before us will be solved not by what government does, but rather by what private actors and innovation does. And I would tell you that America, speaking as a proud American, has a huge future ahead of ourselves in essentially high-tech manufacturing jobs, scientific investment, all the global things that we normally do. And I could go on and on about that if you're interested. But the fact of the matter is that's our future, and we should be honest about it.
Mm-hmm. But in fact, government has gone into a kind of weird private equity mode. We're witnessing the biggest leveraged buyout of all time, in which the federal government uses leverage to buy a whole bunch of failing companies. I don't know if the president realizes he's running a private equity partnership, but he is on a massive scale, just as Ben Bernanke is running the biggest hedge fund in human history. And I share your concerns, Eric. Welcome, by the way, congratulations on making it onto the platform. I like a man who fulfills his obligations despite the airlines.
Thank you. Let's thank Eric for, if I were him, I would have gone right to the hotel in order to drink. Thank you, Eric.
But you raised a question, Eric, which is the one that troubles me the most. How far do the unintended consequences of massive deficit spending, how far do those consequences impede the process you described? I totally agree. The only way out of this is technological innovation, which the US traditionally excels at, and entrepreneurial application of new ideas. But what if we've embarked on a course of fiscal extravagance that ultimately makes that less easy than it used to be? What if it turns out that we're no longer the best place to innovate because of a mounting debt burden that ultimately leads to heavier taxation and diminished incentives for entrepreneurs?
I think you're a little too negative on that. I mean, the American educational system is just phenomenal, especially at the college and graduate school level. the production rate of sort of...
Wait,
yes,
hold on.
at
I want to
college,
get
at the
into
college.
education.
And by the way, and if we would just let all those people come to our country and keep them here, rather than kicking them out after we educate them, that would be helpful. America is a tremendous draw for the kind of people who want to create the kind of future that I think a lot of people talk about and I think is possible. The fact of the matter is we're not going to have a lot of high volume, low wage jobs. They're going to be other ways. Welcome to the globalization. But what we will have is we'll have completely new industries built and invited invest here. The most obvious involving the ones in energy. And I'm not just talking about green energy. I'm talking about rebuilding energy in general, right? And that's something which America can exceed at. So I think there is a path there. And then everybody else will say, oh, look, well, I had that idea too. We should focus our effort on the people who will grow things rather than the people who will just consume existing pieces of the pie. I'm interested in making the pie bigger.
Did you, well, one of the discussions we had here was whether the American capitalist system in the past 20 years became too dominated by the world of finance and creating complex instruments, and everybody taking Neil's course at Harvard, who was a smart mathematician, instead of going to any company except Google, which is the only one that could compete, would rather have gone to Wall Street and created a hedge fund instrument. Do you think that there's a way to get, or should we try to get, more productive people into the part of the economy that's not just financial instruments, whether it be Google or Pepsi?
Why would that question be any different 50 years ago than today?
because the financial sector was much smaller as a percentage of GDP 50 years ago.
But so was my industry. It didn't exist.
No, there is a difference here. 50 years ago, you did not have the complexity we have today. You did not have the interdependence. You had a much more predictable environment. And 50 years ago, you didn't have Google, precisely because you didn't have Google, right? You didn't have massive, jumps in economic variables, and you didn't have over-efficiency that comes from globalization. And over-efficiency makes things run smoother, very cheap, except when you got a problem, boy, you got a problem, okay? So 50 years ago, we had a different world. You can't, I mean, I'm sorry you're a historian, Neil, but sometimes it's good that sometimes you forget. Sorry. But I mean, no, it's good to be a historian if you go very, 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 very far. Or if you're as good as you are, the best in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You're
but
the
we
best
can't really,
mathematician.
no, thanks.
And the best risk engineer.
But you can't go take data points, say, oh, that's how it was as a depression, that's how it was 50 years ago. The world is so different, mostly because of you guys.
Let me pick up on a point. Go ahead, Eric, go ahead.
I'm still not sure. It's always been the case that the best and the brightest have been attracted to high-quality finance jobs, and I think it was also true in the 50s and the 60s and so forth.
Not that much. Before my generation, I went to business school. Before my generation, nobody went to finance. They went to consulting, the smart people.
Well, that's the same. From my perspective, it's the same.
And 50 years ago.
All right, but is this
The point is
something we should try to change?
Here's why it's the same. Because there's a category of people who spend their time worrying about the allocation of money, structure of business, and so forth and so on. And then there's a set of people who are running companies, inventing new things, doing research, what have you. I'm not so worried about the siphoning off. You had a situation where you had artificial incentives that caused people to want to come on the margin here. But in fairness to those people, had they come to Silicon Valley in 1999, they would have received a far greater payoff during our little bubble. So who are we to criticize the Wall Street folks for having their bubble? It was just a bigger bubble.
Do you think, though, that Google creates something that's more real than somebody on Wall Street creating a financial instrument?
To be honest, not really.
Okay.
I mean, Google, when I walked into the company, I said, people pay you for this thing? These little ads?
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm from the big iron school of manufacturing. So in the knowledge economy, you do have very important sectors. It may very well be that the markets misallocated capital to themselves fundamentally because of the agency problem of ownership. A simple diagnostic of what we went through is the incentives drove the behavior. And it's easy to understand this if you think about the people who own companies, right, and who had a lot to lose behave differently than the people who own just a little bit of the company in the form of stock options. And so you had different assumptions of risk, and so forth. The system would have corrected had it had a greater ownership culture and less of an agency culture. And again, one of the comments is it's easy to criticize Wall Street on that, but in fact, the system won't, a single actor who is a prince can't revise their compensation because their competitors have to act in unison, and it's illegal for everybody to plot together. That's called antitrust. So at some point, if we want to address the compensation issue, which in my view is at the root of a lot of these issues, you'd have to do it through some form of government action or consensus.
Let me switch to something else we were talking about earlier, which is the role of the corporation in doing more than just maximizing its shareholder value, but trying to be a corporation with a purpose. Google is very much that way. Its initial public offering warned investors it was going to be that way. Do you see that as an essential part of what Google is and what American corporations should be?
Well, I hope so. There's nothing in Google that's unique to Google in terms of the notion of purpose. People want to work for a reason, and working as just as a salary person or just for a boss who's sort of rough on them doesn't work very well. They want to work for a spirit or a goal. It's much easier to manage people when they have an overarching principle. Many institutions, not just Google, have this. Universities, for example, have them, which I highlighted before. So I would hope that Google establishes a model for sort of the modern sort of way a corporation should work. And while it's absolutely true that under the theory of the firm, the goal of the CEO and the goal of the board is to maximize shareholder returns in the form of profit sharing, if you will, that's not really how corporations should be run. CEOs, speaking as one, have many constituencies: local communities, governments, politicians, so forth and so on. And you'd be foolish to just try to maximize short-term returns. And we argue that we get better long-term returns by doing all the other things, because we get the better people, we get a better brand, we're more innovative, all those sorts of things. But the other reason that we've just taken a position that corporations should be more than simply a shareholder vehicle.
There was something you the fact that our K through 12 education system used to be the best in the world, used to graduate the most, used to have the highest scores. It is somewhere between 17th and 20th, depending on the metrics you now use. And worse yet, it's a two-tiered education system where our kids probably do just fine getting an education, but the gap between those born in good zip codes and those born in bad is widening. Is that the major investment we should be making in order to have an economy in the 21st century that succeeds the way our capitalist model did in the 20th? And I'm going to ask, I know Indra and I were talking about it earlier, so I'm going to get some on the panel to talk about it too.
This, again, is not a new subject. There was a big crisis, if you remember, in the mid-'80s about this question about secondary school education. And the criticism I would offer is I haven't heard very many new ideas in 25 years.
Is that because there's a monopoly generally in public education?
Well, it depends on your sort of political view. If you like this structure or that structure. Let me just observe that in most of the other worlds I live in, there have been tremendous innovation, or at least ideas that sound credible. There are a couple in education, obviously charter schools and those sorts of things have come up, but those are actually relatively old ideas. And I would offer that with the information revolution, Google being an example of it, you would think that education would have changed radically, right? Every one of you now has access through your mobile device, and I would guess that everyone here has a mobile device on you. You have access to essentially the entire knowledge of the world with enough keystrokes. So why is that not radically changing education, at every level, at an age-appropriate and appropriate way for people to learn? And I see relatively little evidence of that. So that tells you something about the education system, that it's based on heuristics as opposed to measurements, or maybe it's a monopoly, or maybe it's under-led, or maybe there's not enough competition, or maybe there's not enough investment. I mean, these are all plausible. But I observe that we're not making we're not going to fundamentally address this until you've got a new idea that really scales. And I haven't heard it yet. Go ahead. I am so glad I'm on the other side of you, Walter.
I'm protecting you, Eric, as
usual. I'm actually an optimist on this, and I would observe that we faced the largest financial crisis since World War II, maybe the Depression, and got through it in many cases very, very quickly, and did so in a pretty impressive way. For people who are still unemployed, that's not a very good message because they don't see it yet, but it's clearly coming. The results that happened in September, financial results from many companies indicated sort of the ending of the recession, and indeed the government is beginning to say that. So I think there's reasons to believe that the underlying economic structures are kicking in, and they're kicking in a really good way. So as an optimist, my view is that we will sort this out, that people will get back to how welcome to how you really create wealth in a society, and it's really created by small business, large business, new business, innovation. I would also tell you that although we complain an awful lot in the United States, you'd much rather have our problems than, for example, Britain's problems economically right now, if you look at debt to equity and so forth. So from our perspective, I think we're pretty well positioned. We have a historic culture of innovation. We move quickly. We focus ourselves as a country pretty well. And my guess is that the government will continue in its current behavior as it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and 40 years ago, and that our opportunity as citizens is to sort of do the best we can, knowing that this is how our political system works, and it's not going to change that much, to go and actually make the world a better place. And I think that's what all of us should try to do as the opportunities come to us over the next few years.